And thank you for joining us here on PM Express tonight. It's a fascinating topic I'm treating tonight on the back of the latest Global Info Analytics survey on the subject of a third term for John Dramani Mahama. I never thought this would hit the front burner for me to talk about it, but it was published today. And considering that there are two Supreme Court cases currently pending before the Apex Court, asking the Supreme Court for some interpretation, you can no longer ignore it. And then you have to add to that the president's recent comments on that is gaining some momentum, and the Supreme Court will have to take a decision. But we need to even ask the question in the first place: should the Supreme Court even entertain it in the first place? And my guess will weigh in on that, or simply throw it away because it's possibly a waste of the Supreme Court's time. But because the president has spoken about it, there are two cases before the Supreme Court on it. There is a survey on it published, and it's already being talked about. Let's get the experts, independent and the politicians, and then the man who did the survey on it to talk to us about it today. So this is the Global Info Analytics recent survey on this particular subject. And the results are fascinating. And this was on the back of the president's pronouncement, which I'll play for you pretty shortly. But it is clear that the overwhelming majority of people say they are in favor of the president simply sticking to this current term that he has, which is his final term. So you see there, 65% of the people say they agree with the president when he says that he's rejecting this third term bid. And that, do you agree or disagree? The president says, as far as he's concerned, the Constitution is clear on the matter. He only has 2 terms, and this is his final term. The 65% of those surveys said they agree with the president. In other words, 65% of those surveyed agree with those who say this is a waste of everybody's time. It is 2 terms, and this is the president's final term. But the interesting thing for me is that you have 27% of the people who say no opinion. And that is interesting. This is a matter that is black and white, I thought. And so you would think that everybody who has a place on the subject, but that's people who, is that they don't care on the subject, they just can be bothered, they are neutral on the matter. We'll get the Global Info Analytics to weigh in, but there's just 8% of people who tell us that they disagree with the president. And so that's a small minority indeed. And so if you're one of those who is in the camp of those who say the president must run a third term, you are in a significant minority. And those who have gone to court themselves, who are asking for this interpretation, I wonder why they're pushing this agenda. Is there a bigger plot here beyond just going to court that we need to uncover or haven't averted our minds to? I'll get my guests weighing on that as well. So this is the constitutional provision in contest. And it's very clear as far as the president is concerned. I'll play that very shortly. It says no person shall be elected president of Ghana for more than 2 terms. And for more than 2 terms is for more than 2 terms. He had his first term between 2013 and 2016. That's his first term. He's having a second term between 2025 to 2028. In fact, he ends in January 2029. That's his term. That's the second term. So it's pretty straightforward for no more than 2 terms. And then somehow they've introduced some other elements into this and asking the Supreme Court to look at it and interpret, which is this question about consecutive. So in the case of JM, there was a break between 2016 when he left office and 2025 when he came back in. And so the point is that the Supreme Court meant it has to be consecutive. Others say, well, it's basically 2 terms. 2 terms is 2 terms, regardless whether it's consecutive follows or not. It is 2 terms, which is the point I was making earlier. So all of a sudden, they've introduced this, ambiguity that the president says wasn't there. They want clarity on whether these electoral breaks resets the eligibility. In other words, once there's a break, there's a reset. If you actually go by that arrangement and that interpretation, the president can now run 2 more terms even now. He can run this term and do another one, which gives him, third term, which is the point, and determine if the restrictions is unconstitutional. Is it interesting? Well, some say it is, and the Supreme Court must weigh in on it. Others say this is a waste of the Supreme Court's time, and they must simply throw it away. Now, this is the president himself, and this is what he says, but you need to watch him and exactly the way he put it. I think it's fascinating, the way he articulated the point himself. The man about whom the litigation revolves had this to say.
People of Ghana gave me a mandate for 1 term. And I am working hard to meet the promises I made them. And so I always tell my ministers, I say, let's number our days so that we can work harder to meet the promises we made the Ghanaian people. I know that people have gone to the Supreme Court seeking interpretation of the clause that governs the tenure of the president. If you ask my personal opinion, I thought that it was clear enough. I've read it over several times. It's exactly what it says, but if they want to ask the Supreme Court, that is their business. But I know that the people of Ghana gave me 1 additional term, and I'm going to work to meet the trust that they put in me.
So that's the president there. One thing he said that you must pay attention to, that I paid attention to, is this is straightforward, but he has read that provision over and over again, and it is clear. And the skeptics raise the point that if he really isn't interested and is that straightforward, why do you read it over and over again? And there's a suggestion there that he actually may be harboring the thought that this may be possible. Because if you really don't value something and it's very straightforward, you read it once and that's it. You just dismiss it. You don't engage it again at all because you just don't want to waste your time. But he says he read it over and over again and it was very clear. Why are you reading a provision which is obvious to you over and over again? The cynics say only possible because he himself is interested. But that is one thing, and I'll get my guests weighing, how they're deconstructing the president's own pronouncement on the subject. But he's not the only person who has spoken about this. The general secretary of his party was very clear. Third term chants are nothing but sycophancy and bootlicking of the highest order. Now, again, let's deconstruct what he said there. To be a sycophant, you must be close to power. To bootlick, you must actually be close to the boot of the preeminent person, right? So this tells you, and it's a confirmation, that there are people in the president's inner circle who are chanting for him to go a 3rd term. And so the general secretary, who himself is an insider, says he calls them sycophants. I mean, it would be hard for me to be a sycophant to the president because I'm not close to him. I can't bootlick him. I'm not that close to actually do that. You have to be close. The very definition of sycophancy is just that, where you give, some full praise, you bootlick the individual. You're so pliant and do anything that they ask for without question, just to earn favors, and you praise him for favors and for a certain outcome that you prefer. You must be close to that power source to do that and to be a sycophant. And so when the general secretary says they are nothing but sycophants, it tells you that within the presidency inner circle, there's a group who actually believe he must run a 3rd term. That's a confirmation. And he calls them sycophants and they're bootlicking as far as the president is concerned. That is, I guess, where the conspiracy then becomes very interesting. So those who have gone to court, one of them will talk to us. The other, I don't know, but there's people say, if you listen to the minority guys, they say, well, this is all engineered. And if it's engineered, is it engineered with the knowledge of the Supreme Court and that the Supreme Court maybe is part of the conspiracy? It's fascinating indeed if you listen and pay attention to the way the issue has been framed by the political players themselves within the party. And then you have another individual spokesperson, one of the spokespeople for the party communications mouthpieces, talking about the same thing, that, the third term is possible, and that demanding the third term, if it's the case, this is Ayariga, by the way, and if you know him, he's, I'm talking about this one, I'll come to him pretty shortly, but I'm talking about this is the majority leader, Mahama.The. Ghanaians believe that a third term is possible. I don't know how he came to that conclusion, and are demanding for a third term. Really? I mean, the data that we just saw today from Global Info Analytics says that's not true. But give this to him. He was speaking on December 19, 2025. That's way before the Global Info Analytics report. But at that time, he was very, very convinced that Ghanaians believe that a third term is possible and that they are demanding for a third term. But then he himself says it is dangerous to keep pushing it. Was he dropping hints there? Why was he generalizing? Why was he speaking for all of us when now the data says that that's not the case? It again goes to back the point that I was suggesting. And maybe there are people close to the president who are pushing this, and part of the reason why this whole Supreme Court thing is engineered and conspired. And then you have another one who says, I want President Mahama to go for a third term. And he's the one I was talking about earlier. He's one of the communications persons for the party. So Ghana won't be the first if this indeed goes to the Supreme Court, and through the court, an interpretation makes it possible for the president to run a third term. Clearly, from the way what he said himself, he will not turn down the invitation if the Supreme Court says go again. He says, well, I'm leaving it to the Supreme Court. It's not me. If they say I should go, well, I will. It's not him. So the Constitutional Review report, though, has something to say about this. The two terms, they say keep it, but they want a 5-year period instead of this 4 years that we have over 2 terms. 4 years over 2 terms, but 5 years now. They want to extend 4 year per term to 5 years, something that Kufuor recommended before he left office. But again, if you look at the Afrobarometer report, it's very clear that 2-term limit is what majority of people prefer. And no term limit is something that is clearly forbidden across the board. So again, the data is strongly in favor of those who don't want a third term and simply want to stick to what we've been used to since 1992. But let me bring in my guests who know far better than I do after this. Stay with me. Thank you very much for staying with us here on PM Express. It's always brought to you by Syntex Science. It is strong, it is tough. Also brought to you by Pepsodent Cavity Fighter Toothpaste and Stanbic CIB Impact Series. My guest is joining me tonight for a conversation. In the studio with me is Musa Dankwa. He heads the Global Info Analytics, and his survey was released today, obviously. Executive Director of the Global Info Analytics. That has sparked a fair bit of interest in this matter again, after the Afrobarometer told us in very clear terms that generally, overwhelming majority of people want term limits. Victor Kojoga Dawuda is a legal practitioner, is one of the brains when it comes to the NDC legal team, has done great work in that field, and I'm grateful that he joins us. I'm curious to know his thoughts on this. And also joining me, by the way, is Ken Crunchy. Is one of the petitioners, editor of Daily Searchlight newspaper. Joins us briefly to get his thoughts on why he is in the Supreme Court. And Professor Kojo Appiah is a professor of constitutional law. He is the best person on this subject because of the fact that there are 2 cases now before the Supreme Court. And I want to ask him whether the court should even entertain it. And so I'm grateful that he joins us. Professor Bafo Ejimendua, always a delight to have him on PM Express, former UN Senior Governance Advisor. The fact that this matter is even now becoming an issue, I'm pretty sure we scares him to death because of the democratic implications for our society. So I'll pick his thoughts on that. And then Nanai J. Bafo is MP for Malaysia South. His thoughts as far as the law is concerned when he joins us on PM Express is always elucidating. Yes, he belongs to the MPP fold, but he comes to this conversation with great legal depth. And happy birthday to you, Nanai J. Bafo. And thanks for saving a bit of the time for chilling and partying. You didn't invite me, but it's okay. Thank you for joining us.
There was no partying.
Oh, there wasn't?
The NDC has made our life hell. So we were in court this morning to represent Dr. Chema Wuntumi. They are taking us from all the things that could make some difference to our lives. But what can you say? They have power. They choose to use the power in the manner which pleases them.
Thank you very much, and happy birthday to you.
Thank you, my dear brother. Thank you.
Let me start with you, Ken Crunchy. Ken, why are you at the Supreme Court? What are you asking from the Supreme Court? Okay, let's fix that. But let me bring in Musa Dankwa pretty shortly. Musa, before we get Ken into the conversation, and please, if you may, all of you kindly unmute for me, so that when we start the conversation, I won't have to repeat unmute for me. Just unmute all. Musa, let me start with you. Today, this came back to the front burner because of your poll. What did you find in this poll?
Actually, there were two questions.
Okay.
The first one was to ask voters whether they agree with the president's decision not to go for a third term, or they disagree with him. Now, the poll showed clearly that 65% of the voters side with the president. They want him to stick to his one-term understanding, and that's what they want. But about 27% of them disagree with him. For them, they want him to go for a third term. Another 8% didn't have an opinion. Now, interestingly, if you look at the party lines in terms of the data disaggregation, you'll find that almost every party affiliates, NDC, MPP, floating voters, other party supporters, and those who don't even tell you, agree with the president, unanimously, by majority.
The NDC?
Yes.
Okay. Those who identify themselves as NDC, yes. They agree with the president?
That he's not going to seek for a third term. But it doesn't end there. It gets a bit trickier when you flip the question, that there are some people who are calling for him to contest for a third term. Do you agree or disagree with those people calling for him to go for a third term? Then the number changes a bit.
Okay.
Then you have 50% now saying no. You don't agree with those people who are calling on the president to go for a third term. Then 40% said yes.
They agree with the people asking him to go for a third term. And these are these the NDC, those who identify themselves as general?
This is general.
The general.
Now, if you come down to the party affiliation, there you see that NDC guys are on their own. Because it's only NDC by majority who back those who are asking him to go for a third term. Everybody else said no.
So the party-affiliated respondents all back those asking the president to go for a third term?
Only NDC does. The rest don't.
Okay, so if you're not an NDC, then you're not backing those who are asking him to go for a third term.
Absolutely.
But if you're an NDC, you are backing those who are asking him to go for a third term.
Yes.
And let's read through the first part of this. The NDC affiliated respondents, when you ask them if they agree with the president's rejection of a third term, what did they say?
They agree.
Okay, they agree that he doesn't want to go.
Yes,
and they agree with the president.
I think his public statement has impacted the second question.
Okay.
Because but he said that he doesn't want to go. So even if I was thinking he should go, now that he says he's not going, why should I back that statement?
So before he said that,
there was no data, but my suspicion is that there would have been a much higher
number
for him asking him to go for a third term.
So for where you say categorically, would you say then that if you're generalizing this to the population, the sentiment is that the president has only one term that ends January 7, 2029?
I think so.
That's a general sentiment from the polling?
Yes.
Okay. Stay with me. Let me bring in a man who has gone to the Supreme Court, one of the two petitioners now who have taken this matter up at the Supreme Court, Ken Crunchy. Kenneth, explain to me why you are at the Supreme Court, asking the Supreme Court for this interpretation.
Well, good evening, Ivan. Let me say a very good evening to you, to your listeners, and to my fellow panelists. I hope I'm clear now.
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear, yes.
Okay. We are in the Supreme Court posting what we believe is one of the most important questions in our democracy. Whether the presidency is consecutive or not. If it is consecutive, then what it says clearly is that the person elected to the office of president shall serve 2 terms or shall serve for 2 terms. So basically, that's why we're in the Supreme Court asking that if you take Article 66(2) in conjunction with other articles in the 1982 Constitution, the president can serve 2 terms, and that once the person comes into office and then goes out of office, the eligibility criteria is reset. So that is basically what we are in the Supreme Court doing.
Okay. But let me ask you more plainly. Is it your belief that as it is currently constructed and upon a proper interpretation of the Constitution, the president can run another term beyond this current one?
You know, the 1992 Constitution is a document that is sui generis. It is a big document, okay, and it is to be read as a whole. Mm-hmm. So we are depending upon one specific clause in the 1992 Constitution. We are saying that read the 1992 Constitution as a whole, look at the background, the history of the 1992 Constitution, read the Constitution as a whole, and then you may come to that conclusion. That's the point that we are making now.
Okay. Okay.
Now, I've also heard that. Let me say good evening to my brother, Mr. Musa Dankwa. I've heard the argument about a 3rd term. We are not seeking a 3rd term for President Mahama. That is not what we are doing. What we are doing is that we are saying that the presidency is consecutive. If you recall, around 2023, I took a similar route to the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, that matter is still hanging in the Supreme Court. It has not been resolved. And it is a similar thing I took at that time, that the presidency is consecutive. A person elected shall serve 2 terms. So that is what we are about. So
as far as you're concerned, just to put it in simple terms, it should be consecutive, as in it should have served 2013 to 2016, I mean, January 2017, and then continue from there. If he didn't do that, then he couldn't have. In fact, that was your first case, which was thrown out by the Supreme Court.
That's why I'm saying that once he's elected out of office, if he served only 1 term, then the eligibility criteria is reset.
Okay. So
the Constitution is explicit. So the person elected shall serve not more than 2 terms. It's quite explicit.
Okay. So as far as you're concerned, there is ambiguity that needs clearing.
There's an ambiguity. There's a genuine ambiguity. That is why we are not depending on, unlike the other petitioner, we are not depending on Article 66(2) alone. We have brought in other clauses of the other articles and clauses of the 1982 Constitution, like Article 264, 2462, and others, that read the Constitution as a whole. Then you may come to a certain conclusion.
But do you accept that the effect of what you've done, if indeed the Supreme Court entertains it, may lead to John Mahama going for a 3rd term?
I was asked this question, and I don't have a problem with. You see, it's not about a 3rd term. It's about whether he is eligible to stand for another term.
And as far as your reading is concerned, he's eligible to.
That may be the effect, but that is not what we are seeking. In fact, if you read my rate, it doesn't mention Mr. Mahama. We are saying that if you read the entire 1992 Constitution, bring in the relevant clauses, and then the opportunity lies there that he can serve consecutively. Okay,
Ken, stay with me. Let me bring in our constitutional law lecturer par excellence, Professor, who joins us on the line already. And I was making a point that I just love listening to his elucidations on the Constitution. What do you say to the 2 cases, but very similar, all around that constitutional provision of 66(1) and 2, but Ken expands it a bit more. First of all, is there a case at all for the Supreme Court to hear? Prof.
Evans, thanks for having me, but my background is not constitutional law.
Okay.
International law and human rights. All the same, regarding the subject matter, in my opinion, I think that it is a case that doesn't need interpretation by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court in recent times have been a little bit slow and not ready to adopt an adventurous position in interpreting, going the way of interpretation. And I think that the matter is clear. The law is clear, and the Supreme Court has asserted the point that if the law is in black and white, for example, the Akosa test, then there's no need for interpretation. So in my opinion, this matter is not something that the Supreme Court should worry its head over, because it is clear that if you have 2 terms, it means that it doesn't need to be consecutive. And so if you serve 1 term and you come back to serve another term, that brings your opportunity to serve as president to an end.
And just for the avoidance of that, I want to read that provision you just mentioned. And I think the clause, the specific clause in question is Article 66(2). A person shall not be elected to hold office as president of Ghana for more than 2 terms. And I think, Prof, your point is that for more than 2 terms is for more than 2 terms, whether it's consecutive or not. Once you've done 2 terms, if you did it in 1992 and you did it in 2026, it's 2 terms, and so it's done.
Exactly.
That's your position. Yeah.
Exactly, yes. And you know, when you look at the history of constitution making throughout the continent, this is what we are in the 3rd stage of constitution making. The first stage is when, during the 60s, after independence, the constitution that we adopted through negotiation with the departing colonial authorities, and then followed by attempts by during the period when we had one-party rule and so on. There was also an attempt to, change the constitutions to allow for one-party rule, life presidential terms, and so on. In this particular term, the period, the post-Cold War period that we are in now, the constitution that we have, while the first one was influenced by the departing colonial authorities, this particular model was inspired or influenced more by the American system. And the American system goes by the 2-term process. And that is what, if you look at the Afrobarometer survey and so on, they affirm that it's 2 terms. So we don't need to worry or, think about whether it is consecutive or not. The thing is 2 terms. So the idea is that it is to give room for anybody else who wants to also serve, to have the opportunity to contest for that office. And that's the essence of the right to vote and to be voted for. So that is the idea behind it. And I think that that is what the Constitution makes it clear in 66(2), that the person shall not be elected to hold office as president of Ghana for more than 2 terms. And so that is what it is.
I mean, but also weighing on, yes. Yes, yeah.
I understand there is another case that has been filed just on the 20th, one Erica Pia, on the same...
No, but there are 2 cases before already. I see there's a 3rd one.
There is a 3rd one.
I see.
There's a 3rd one.
Still on 62.
Still on...
Sorry, 66.
Yes, so that we have 3 cases.
Do you know a bit more about what this 3rd case is asking for?
Yes, the 3rd case.
It's also asking for an interpretation?
It's also asking for declaration and interpretation. And it's also asking that somebody who has done 2 years cannot be disqualified. So I'll get it for you.
Okay, please get, because that's
I'll get it for you.
That's interesting.
It's interesting.
I mean, Professor Pejetria, whilst Victor gets us a bit more into that 3rd case, I mean, clearly, people believe that there's ambiguity there that the Supreme Court must weigh in on.
Well, that is where it gets murkier and interesting, because, of course, different people have different views on different issues, and probably people really feel that the Constitution is not clear, so there's a need for clarification, or the Constitution is clear, but that in their mind the clarity is that the president can go for a 3rd term. Now, where my concern is and where it looks interesting to me is that having studied third-termism in different countries on the continent, right now we have between 15 and 18 countries that have adopted a third-termism approach. It is a kind of process which starts from different angles, and then ultimately we get to a point where initially, generally, people will say that we are not in favor of the third term. And then through some process, through some manipulation and so on, ultimately, the people come to accept that there is we have to go for a third term. And the processes, we have the hard process of changing the constitution to allow for a third term, or the soft approach, which have also been applied to apply for a third term. And when the process starts, it starts slowly. The president will say, no, I'm not interested, no, I'm not interested, probably for a third or fourth time, and then says, well, if the people says I'm not interested, well, let them decide, and then I will respect the decision of the people. And that is one part of the game, initially refusing the discussion, which is a way to test the people's interest in the subject matter. And then reverse psychology, if you like, comes into the picture, where he says, well, I don't want to stand, but if you want me to stand, who am I? I have to respect your wishes. That is one aspect of the game. And the other aspect is going to the courts, which is one of the, excuse me, soft law approaches, because here you are going by the law. And if you have a judiciary that is compliant to the president in power or to the party in power, they are likely to sway the opinion of the people and says that it is based on law. So what can we do? The law has decided, the judges have decided. And so that is one area where we also need to look at and see if those cases that have been brought before the Supreme Court are really part of the scheme that maybe the president in power is trying to use, or somebody who wants him to remain in power wants to use to be able to keep him in power. So these are issues that we need to also bring into the discussion.
And Prof, I need to ask you on the back of that, though, how then do you read the president's public pronouncements? It sort of falls into the trend we just painted there.
Yeah, it's part of the strategy. If you look at a number of these scenarios, a number of the cases that countries that have gone third-termism, that is the trend. The president will initially say, I'm not interested, I'm not interested. And the polls also support that. But when the soft approach is not possible, the hard approach is applied, where there is suppression of civil society activism, suppression by academics against the third-termism, and then people go on demonstrations, some are, bulldozed to the ground and killed and so on, where the president will force his way. So right now we see a situation where the 65%, which is a huge majority, saying that we don't like the presidential term. But we need to look at other factors, other issues. For example, and in any way, I'm not saying in any way that I'm concluding John Mahama wants to go for a third term. But look at the regional tribunal system. It can aid that particular third term agenda. Look at how the Chief Justice was removed from office. It can support that third term agenda. The number of Supreme Court justices that we are seeing addition to them at the Supreme Court, it's another sign. And I'm looking at this all from the experiences of other countries where third-termism starts slowly, but it begins to snowball. And then if there's a possibility of going by the soft approach through legal means which are still compromised and, done and manipulated, the third term comes into place, or the hard approach which leads to violations of human rights along the way. And the president bulldozes his way, even within his political party, because having finished his term, there are others in line who would want to succeed him. But he either buys them or is able to, suppress their interests and then goes for a third term.
Fascinating indeed. And I want to bring in Professor Bafo Ijibeda before I hear from Adaudu and Bafo. Prof, weigh in on that for me very, very briefly. And whilst you come in, and thanks to Victor Adaudu, I've just managed to access that writ, the third one, before the Supreme Court. And it's fascinating indeed. And this is by Eric Appiah. He's a Ghanaian citizen. And he's invoking the Supreme Court's original jurisdiction, interpretation jurisdiction on Article 1301A. And the main constitutional provision, obviously, is still the same article we are just talking about, Article 66.2. And his core argument is that the two-term restriction should be interpreted as applying only to 2 consecutive terms, not 2 terms accumulated over a person's lifetime. He argues that a former president who serves 2 terms, leaves office for a period, and later returns, should remain eligible to contest again. And that he wants a declaration that Article 66.2 does not impose a lifetime ban on a person who has already served 2 non-consecutive terms, which obviously will mean that John Mahama, should run and can run again. And then a declaration that disqualifying someone merely because they have served 2 terms at different times will be inconsistent with Article 66.2. Fascinating indeed. 3 cases. And this is the latest one. And Daudu, thank you very much for bringing it up, because it really makes this a very interesting conversation to have. This is just dropping on our laps, thanks to him. I'll let him expand on it. But Prof, how do you feel about these? For somebody like you who is a democracy lover and has fought all your life to keep democracies functioning.
Right. Thank you. And let me thank Musa Dankwa for always provoking public discussions on such very important matters. So I think
Global Info Analytics
is doing well. Yes. Now, coming to the substantive issues. I've been thinking as I'm listening to my friends, and especially the presentation by Professor, my good friend, the lawyer. It's very fascinating because, first of all, let me make this point. I am curious, and lawyers can help us with this, whether the Supreme Court is bound to admit every case filed. For instance, in the United States, the Supreme Court can look at a submission and say, look, this, we don't even look at it. They reject certain submissions. Not every submission is taken up. So if the Supreme Court were to be firm in its idea that this is a 2-term position and no more, then probably, if that provision was there for them to reject, they would have rejected it. But once they admit, then I assume that there's a prima facie case. They think there's something important to really go into and decide for the nation. So maybe that, again, is a gray area. Then I am looking at this subsequent submission that you just shared with us, the 3rd one or 4th one. And again, if it's admitted, then again, I'm beginning to be more curious why the Supreme Court will begin to admit all these kind of cases. So maybe later on our friend, the lawyer, can educate us on that. But having said that, I have no problem with anybody seeking proper interpretation of the Constitution when faced with this kind of situation. Remember, Evans, that back in 1996, when Kwame Piani decided to file to be president, a member of his own party went to the Supreme Court to give an interpretation whether he was qualified, only because Kwame had been jailed, as you know, by the Rawlings regime. And the thing is that ex-convict cannot be president. And he came at the last minute when he had really gotten involved in the campaign and all. But of course, in the end, as we know, the court said, no, you cannot. So that helped to settle matters. That's clear-cut. Now, this particular case, I am curious that it will be filed, and moreover, to tell us tonight that, in fact, there are other similar cases that the court has admitted. It raises all kinds of questions. And I do like the appraisal, the analysis by Professor, my good friend.
Professor Pejutia.
Yeah, my good friend. Sorry for missing your name. His analysis is excellent because, you see, this won't be the first time. many African countries have gone through this process before, and we all know how it starts. But again, I am curious why, after 3 or 4 or 5 statements by the president rejecting the idea that he's not going to go, people still go forward. Secondly, I'm also curious that those NDC stalwarts who were seeking to be contestants, for some weeks now, we don't hear anything again. Either because they feel chilled or they suspect something, we don't hear anything about. There was somebody who was going around for what was called a thank you tour or something. We don't hear anything of that again. And that again, if you are very observant, you have to understand that nobody wants to play safe. Everybody wants to be play safe. I mean, that is talking about that part. But I think at this point, if the Supreme Court has accepted to listen to this case, to hear this case, then they should do so quickly to allay all concerns. Because this is a very critical point in our democracy. Ghana has been a star pupil, so to speak. As a democratic state, we are giving leadership to the continent in many ways. And this is not a time to toy around with tampering with this particular important clause. As it reads, and lawyers can have a way to reinterpret, but as we all read it as lay people, it's clear, say 2 terms. 2 terms is 2 terms, whether it's conservative or not. In fact, the reason why President Mahama could come back for the current term, because he served 1 term. The Constitution says 2 terms, so he has every right to come. Now that he's serving 2 terms, I am curious why all these matters are coming around. But of course, in all these cases, you have people who have vested interest in his presidency. If he himself is not even interested, mind you, there will be people who will be pushing him to do this. But I personally want to believe, even though I can tell you, I will never lay my head on the chopping board for any politician, because I can never trust politicians. But I think President Mahama is decent enough to do the right thing, not to bring the democracy of our country into this repute. He himself condemned certain previous efforts by some countries to do that. Now, I don't think he wants to drive the country into that.
Except, though, that, and I doubt I'll bring it in here, if the Supreme Court admits these 3 cases and renders an interpretation that says basically that, conservative is what the intention was, it's not him. It has nothing to do with him. And if he feels he has run again, he will run again. And it's the Supreme Court's interpretation that clears the path.
Yes. Evans, like Prof was saying, and let me say Professor Tuya and
Professor
Bafo was saying. Let me answer Professor Bafo's question first. That it is not every case that you send to Supreme Court, then the Supreme Court will look at it. In our jurisdiction, yes, you can send every case. It depends on what. And for interpretation, a case that has been brought for interpretation, the Supreme Court can look at it and say, look, the provision you want us to interpret is clear. It's unambiguous. And whilst the Supreme Court takes that position, that you are trying to invoke their interpretative jurisdiction and says that there is nothing to interpret about this provision, that ends the matter.
So they can refuse to admit it?
Oh, no, not that they will refuse to admit it, but they will tell you the provision is clear.
Okay.
And in this provision, as I see and where I sit today, it says that it defines term. And the term is 4 years. And it says you can do
no more than 2.
No more than 2 terms. There is nothing ambiguity. What we are importing, everybody I read through, is consecutive terms. There is no word consecutive in the provision. There is no word there.
Can't an interpretation bring that in?
You see, interpretation, 1, Ghana, we have adopted the purposive, right? Now, first, read the words. What is the ordinary meaning of the words? What's the meaning of term? What's the meaning of term? What's the meaning of 4 years? So 4 plus 4, is it not 8 years? So it has defined. So that you give the ordinary meaning. Now, if those ordinary meaning will lead to absurdity, as people are saying that now, count the 4, that after you've done the 4, the first one, and you go. Now, when you come back, you do the second one, it resets the eligibility criteria that now you can do another 2 terms. Another 2 terms will mean that it's 12 years. But the Constitution is clear. It says 8 years. As we stand, as the law, that is what we have. So the Supreme Court can come and say that when we read the provision, there's nothing for us to interpret. That's one point, that the court can disappoint everybody and bring this to conclusion. Right. If the Supreme Court decides that, okay, we want to interpret it, the Supreme Court has been given that power. They can decide and say, oh, okay, we think that there is a rival meaning put on the 2 terms, that a person shall...
But isn't that what it is now? I mean, that at least 3 of the petitioners believe there is another interpretation to that particular clause.
You see, when you go to court, it is not what you want that the court will give to you. It is what the law is. And if the law says that this can be given to you, then they give it to you. You don't go and say that you count your reliefs, what you want, that the court should say that. That's why you say that on proper interpretation of this, we think that the conclusion you should arrive to is what they want. The court is not bound to say that on interpretation of what you have brought, that is the meaning of...
Victor, let me ask you, should the court accept and admit and interpret this matter? Or should they do the first option, which is that, throw it away?
No, where I sit today and where I read the Constitution today, I don't see any interpretation in this matter.
So the Supreme Court should not entertain this?
Yeah, I don't think. It's just been an issue that has been brought, and as the law has been, and we have practiced this law for over 30 years now, the Constitution, that is what has been said. So if people are importing words into the constitutional provision and want that to be interpreted, it is left with the Supreme Court to decide. It's just like the other one that had been sent recently. That's not for actually interpretation. They want some kind of enforcement as to the delegates versus the universal adult suffrage.
Yes.
Right? Because the Supreme Court has an enforcement power, that it has interpretative power. It has another power that, look, it supervises all the other courts. So what these cases are coming is for the Supreme Court to interpret. And there are several cases where people want interpretation. They go and the Supreme Court clearly says that what you have brought, it is clear, it's unambiguous, and we are not going to interpret it.
I mean, let me bring your colleague Bafo Iwa into the... Bafo, considering that just on the 20th of July, just last week, a third case was brought to the Supreme Court, shouldn't the Supreme Court accept and render finality to this matter? Because it appears it's not going away. It's just piling up. There's more interest generated.
Well, I don't know why I should be piling up. Oh, sorry.
I want to. Sorry. Oh, there are 2 Bafos. You're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, Mr. Let me call Mr. Wa. Mr. Wa, please go attack that question for me.
Well, there is addition to human mischief. And so if you say you are going to entertain everything and anything at the Supreme Court, you are likely to have a piled up of such suits at the Supreme Court. But set our minds to the circumstance under which the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court may be invoked. The jurisdiction of the Supreme Court may not be invoked to answer an academic question. Clearly, at this point, the necessity for the Supreme Court to decide whether or not the meaning being put to the constitutional provision is one way or the other, because firstly, the moment has not arisen where nomination is being filed and a certain president is saying that he wants to contest. At that point, the constitutional question would arise, and the need or the necessity to invoke the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court may also become incumbent. At this point, there is no constitutional mandate on the Supreme Court to answer the question that has been put to it. This needs to be made clear. It needs to be made clear because the Supreme Court is also not, does not offer or prefer an academic opinion. The Supreme Court answer real life questions. And in this circumstance, there's no real life question that has arisen. And so in my humble opinion, this is not a question that the Supreme Court is likely to be called upon, or the Supreme Court is likely to accept, because it does not invoke its jurisdiction. That said, there is no ambiguity as far as the constitutional provision is also concerned. And I share the views of Professor Kodwo Piejetia and Professor Bafo Ajimaindia. There is no ambiguity. Look, if you say that Article 66, Clause 2, admits to an ambiguity, then you are suggesting that the president even has an automatic right to a second term. Then you are suggesting that the president has a right to a second term. Otherwise, if the president's second term is not automatic, then we all agree that there is the possibility, like it happened to President Mahama, for a president to go for just one term and walk away, right? And so the Constitution, in setting the limitation under Article 66(2), considered the possibility that a president may lose elections and also come back. Otherwise, right, it would have made the second term automatic. To the extent that it doesn't make it automatic, it is clear to the framers of the Constitution that, as I said, it is possible for a president to just hold office for one term and go away without coming back at all, like it's happened elsewhere in the case of Jimmy Carter, like it happened in America in the case of Gerald Ford, right? And so it is so possible that you can occupy office for one term. And within that possibility, the Constitution anticipates that if you come back for just another term. And so you may hold office for just 2 terms and then walk away. Okay, so 2 terms, right, is 2 terms, not 2 consecutive terms. This ought to be made clear. Look, my brother, this is not new. In this country, oftentimes there has always been debate as to whether or not one president will hand over. During the time of President Rawlings, there was this controversy as to whether or not he was going to hand over. People didn't expect him to hand over. This is what forced him to do the Swedro Declaration. At some point, President Akufo-Addo himself, people were in doubt whether or not he was going to hand over at the end of his tenure. And he came up on several occasions to debunk that and firmly stated his position that he would go away upon the expiration of his final term.
You've also heard from John Mahama. You believe exactly. You believe him when he says what he says.
Exactly. It is not. So therefore, it is surprise at all that President Mahama is going through the same thing. That said, what Professor J. Chia said cannot also be dismissed. It is also quite characteristic, particularly of Francophone West Africa and other places, where the president wants to do a 3rd term. You hear such commentaries right, coming up, especially when we have heard the majority leader in parliament, right, made a suggestion to that effect, okay? And so it is unsurprising. We've heard also on your sister station, Asempa, where a senior member of the NDC has also made allusions to the effect that President Mahama may have to go for another term, right? And so what is happening is also characteristic, even though the trend suggests something that we have seen in this country. We are also seeing a different trend where see members, some ruling party would result in some, if you like, doubt in terms of the president's own position, particularly when you put it within the context of Francophone West Africa, right? These things oftentimes happen. You are likely to be on your guard. Then comes Supreme Court suits, okay? These Supreme Court suits that we are seeing, okay, you cannot say that the persons, or some of the persons are doing it by themselves, okay? Particularly if you look at some of the lawyers who are representing some of them, these are very serious lawyers, very, very serious lawyers. I mean, if you look at the one which is being filed, right, under the hand of someone like lawyer Kwesi Afrifa in Kumasi, he's a very serious lawyer. And so when you see this, right, he's not somebody who would take up such matters, for the fun of it. And so when you see these things, you begin to interrogate what really is behind this. Because I know somebody like lawyer Kwesi Afrifa, he's a very serious lawyer, he's a very good lawyer, right? He's a lawyer who will take his dollar and make sure that he doesn't represent you, right, for the fun of it. And so you want to interrogate who is behind this.
Are you suggesting that there's some other hand at play here, orchestrating all this and plotting to have the Supreme Court interpret this in a certain way?
I am analyzing the situations and asking questions. Okay, I would not make conclusive statements, but I am raising issues for our consideration, right? That some of the cases, you may want to dismiss them. But I very respectfully, as a practitioner who knows some of the lawyers who are leading this charge, right, and know how they do their business, know that some of them, right, are not what people may want to look at it for. They are really serious, because some of the lawyers are very serious lawyers who will not take up such matters for the fun of it.
Okay.
Right? And so when you put all these facts together, as much as we have a trend where presidents have faced such questions and they have had to come up to deny historically, we are seeing something else this time. This is the first time that presidents have not only been forced to come out, but we are also seeing a situation where an attempt is being made, and in some of them, very serious attempts being made, right, to seek interpretation at the Supreme Court. And so it is something that you cannot ignore. You ignore it at your own peril. Now, if we are to judge what is happening by judicial precedent, then I would say there's no cause for alarm. However, we have also had outliers in the manner which our Supreme Court has dealt with certain matters, which can sometimes test lack of certainty on the part of the Supreme Court. And that can also make it worrisome. And so on that basis, you cannot dismiss these cases, right? If you dismiss them, you'll be doing so at your own peril.
And that I want to bring in your other colleague in the studio. Adaudu, you had an intervention.
Yeah, I had an intervention. You see, even whilst the court, we in Ghana has adopted a position that what is the mischief behind every provision, the purpose, why you find that provision within the Constitution. Because they know that people would always want to circumvent, go around the law. What it says and never says. So the purpose, the Supreme Court always looked at the purpose. And one of the places they can find the reason and the purpose will be the Constituent Assembly, what they did in 1991 and 92. We will inform you the reasons why we have that provision. That makes it clear or that it is not clear. Right. So that is where the Supreme Court had that power. Yes, like he's saying that this has been brought and looking at the situation, what is happening, what is being put before the Supreme Court. Will the Supreme Court allow this to interpret just because people are yearning for? And my view is that as we speak today, if you look at the
There's
law,
no basis to entertain.
there's no basis. But if the people decide that we want to amend the Constitution, constitutional provision, and others, and put in a different rendition of the provision, that will be it, if that is what Ghanaians want. But as what it is now, and looking at the purposive approach that is adopted, that is the mischief rule, so that you can cure the mischief that people will want to play with the law. It gives you the purpose why you have such provisions.
Yeah, I mean, and Musa, let me bring you in that political question, which is, Professor Pijutia eloquently talked about it.
Yeah.
What seemed to be the trend on the continent elsewhere? So he lays it out, and you see it's playing out. What's your thoughts on that, considering the polling that you've done and people's sentiments around this?
Look, we've seen this happen in Cote d'Ivoire in recent times, but I think Ghanaians have matured politically since 1993 Constitution. And Ghanaians, from what I've heard from them, love to be seen as Democrats. And any idea, any attempt to kind of bring something that for them will be alien to them, I think they will resist it. And if you look at the polling data, I mean, Ghana is not just NDC. It's broader people who are voting. And the people who really decide in this country are the floating voters, and they oppose it. So if you want to have a constitutional issue that will go to the voters to decide on, it will be rejected.
So the constitutional amendment path is dead from the beginning?
No, I think people will not go for it.
Yeah, I mean, but that's on the path here. The path is the Supreme Court.
Look.
And that is a constitutional democratic process.
Look.
Because the Supreme Court is the creation of the Constitution.
I don't want to go in the minds of the president. But having led the continent in showing that he's a true Democrat, and he believes in good governance, I don't believe he will take that path.
You don't believe so?
No, even when offered, he won't take it.
Even when the Supreme Court interprets it in his favor?
He will not take it.
Why? Why wouldn't he?
No, it's not about power all the time. You know, your legacy is very important. You could be popular now. You win third term, there could be chaos. You destroy everything you have done. That is unknown. And you have to go when the applause is high.
Okay. But what do you say about those around him? Because if you pay attention to the General Secretary, he said they're sycophants, right? And I was making the point earlier, if he uses the word sycophants, then it means that people in this inner circle who are pushing this agenda. How does the president deal with that?
Look, in every presidency, either Ghana or anywhere in the world, there are people who are close to power who would like to maintain power with the current leadership. They fear maybe new leadership may not probably give them what they've been enjoying currently. So there will be people who will be pushing all sorts of things. But it's also a good leader who says, look, you could be pushing me towards this, but I won't take it. I have something to protect. That's my reputation as a good president. And for those people, look, there's life beyond politics. Life beyond politics. And look, no matter how long the man stays, he would one day leave. What happens? So there's always tomorrow. So they should just prepare themselves for maybe new leadership.
What do you think it will mean for the NDC itself if this somehow turns out to be what we've seen in the Francophone Africa?
Look,
with the NDC itself,
I think there could be an implosion. I don't think the delegates themselves, as they are entirely in line with the general NDC voters on this matter. We have done a lot of work, but not everything we can put out there. I believe that people want kind of a good succession plan in NDC, to transition from one leader to the other. And they believe that nurtures democracy and make the party grow. Rawlings didn't do that, and I don't see why Mahama would do that.
And Professor Professor Epejetia, on that point, isn't it then prudent for the Supreme Court to adopt this and put finality to it by rendering a ruling on the matter that puts it to bed beyond all reasonable doubt? Because if they refuse to entertain it and say there's no merit, and somebody may cook it up and bring it up in a different way, in a different fashion. Isn't this an opportunity, I guess, considering that there are now 3 cases filed, for the Supreme Court to seize the moment quickly and prevent the speculation that is currently happening and kill it with a firm interpretation?
Yes, definitely the Supreme Court has to come in now. But for me, I think either of the approaches will work. If the Supreme Court comes out clearly that this is not a case of interpretation, there is no ambiguity here, so the cases we have brought, we kill them. I think that is, it may even send a stronger message that the Supreme Court is not ready to entertain any, at best you can describe it as a moot question. So, but if it has to go to hearing the matter and receiving the applications and submissions and so on, that is also another way to go about it. But I think if there's no ambiguity, the Supreme Court should come away straight away and resolve the matter so that we all know that that is not the way to go to if you want a 3rd term for the president.
And Prof, just a final one on that point then. So you are with those who say the Supreme Court should not entertain this?
No. I think the Supreme Court should not entertain this. And come out forthwithly to say that and back it with the relevant case law that we already have in the system.
And Professor Jumendia, however, the president must not only deal with these cases in the Supreme Court if indeed decides to listen to it, but it must deal with those around him in his inner circle who are pushing this agenda, those that the General Secretary describes as sycophants. And if you listen to the rumor mill, some of them are very strong, stalwarts in the party. How should the president deal with that? I mean, let's assume that those who have gone to court are external to him. Let's assume that he doesn't know them. And if you listen to Bafo, even that one you can't dismiss because they're sort of, lawyers behind some of the cases. But what about those within his ranks who are close to him, who are pushing this agenda and feeding this to him on a daily basis?
Look, if the President Mahama, doesn't want it, he will be able to ward them off. And I believe strongly that President Mahama is going to do just that, because he knows the implication of making a decision contrary to what the people want. So in a way, I share my friend Musa Dankwa's point. Secondly, I share the point just reinforced by Professor Apiaje Atua, that the Supreme Court, and I think I made that point earlier, should decisively reject this. Look, this is the first time. Rawlings' time, I didn't see any petition for review. Kufuor's time, there was nothing like that. Mahama first, well, he didn't go for the full term, so he came back. Kufuor's time, where people, in fact, interestingly, it were our good friends in the NDC who were claiming that Kufuor doesn't want to leave. Now, of course, in the end, we also that wasn't the case. So again, it's not surprising that this time around, the same issue has come up. But what is different this time is the persistence of individuals who want to get the Supreme Court involved. So again, I will reiterate that if the court, in its own wisdom, believe that these are frivolous cases because the Constitution is quite clear, then it shouldn't be entertained.
But Prof, you raise a democratic question. Because this is before a democratic forum. The Supreme Court is the creation of the Constitution. If they admit, entertain, and they decide that this indeed merits interpretation, and so interprets, that creates the path for another term, that is constitutional. That is democratic, is it not?
Of course, you're right. But again, remember that in other jurisdictions like the US, the court rejects certain cases submitted to it. And that is also democratic because the Supreme Court has that authority to make that decision. So it's not aberration at all of our democratic process. Because, if such cases that are clear-cut in the Constitution, as all the lawyers on the panel are saying, are to be entertained, then it gives room for people like my good friend, my namesake Bafo, was saying earlier, the parliamentarian. It gives room for people to begin to speculate when we know that it's so clear. So the Supreme Court will help the nation by allaying the anxieties of individuals, reinforcing the position already taken by President Mahama, and quench all these things. And then we move on. Again, even the party itself is not unanimous on what the president should be. Clearly, some strong opinion have been expressed. I showed one to us earlier, where the Secretary General is even calling some members of his own party being sycophants.
Yeah.
So I think there's a serious rift in the party over this matter. And I don't think the president would like to have his party divided when it's about leaving the scene. So I think that it's an interesting case. You're right. I mean, we all have the right to go to court if we think we need interpretation. But it's not every interpretation that the Supreme Court should render, especially under the surface of it. It doesn't really register anything important.
And Adaudu, quickly, you are a party person. What's the chatter among the NDC on this matter?
Oh, yes.
Within the NDC? What's the feeling?
It's a congregation of vested interest in the party. We have the hawks, we have the doves. It has been an issue that people think that, yes, with the good works that the government is doing, why not? If there's an opportunity, it must continue. And President Mahama should be given the opportunity to continue. That's what the people also wish. Others think that, no, there must be the term. As the Constitution has said, it must be respected. So this has been debated.
One side will win, right, on this matter within the party?
No. But as the law says, as it is now, right, I don't think that it will be feasible that you want to go for third term. But if the Supreme Court speaks, admits it, and says that this is the interpretation they are putting on it, and it opens the door, right, why not?
The president will run again.
Yeah, I'm sure if it is. But the way I see the president is not in the mood for politicking now. What he wants to leave a legacy.
Okay.
And the president, all he's doing, that is why you see the trajectory of things he's doing in his government. Although some party members may not be happy with some of the situation because the expectation was that when it comes, we are also going to enjoy just like the previous regime. Things went. We will have it our way. But somehow we are not having it like the way the expectation was. He's thinking about his legacy and he's thinking about the nation. And I don't think he will want to leave a bad precedent at the end of the
this
day.
one. Okay, I don't thank you very much. And third case filed at the Supreme Court and counting. I add and counting because it's dropping like flies on the lap of the Supreme Court, and they have to do something very quickly. I think the consensus here is that the Supreme Court needs to do something very quickly to deal with this gap that all these rates is feeling, and then just begins to get everybody worked out. And then Musa Dankwa gets in. When is the next poll coming?
We have the traditional cross-sectional poll coming in the next maybe 60 days. But the one we did today is a baseline, and that will be done every 2 months.
Okay, so we'll see whether this shifts down the line. Enjoy the rest of your evening.